This video was brought to you by Skillshare. Once upon a time there was a man called Adolf. This was a very bad man with very bad intentions. It was easy to deduce this based on his horrible mustache. Amongst a long list of very evil deeds, Hitler wanted to blow up Great Britain. But this was no easy task, because Great Britain had the geographic advantage of being an island. Not being able to attack by land, Hitler tried his luck by water and air, but in both cases he was defeated, so he needed a different approach. One idea was to launch bombs into England from the safe comfort of recently conquered France. He could use the Strait of Dover, which is only 33 kilometers away from British land, to cause havoc without never getting near to the tea-drinking nation.
That sounds like a good idea, but how would he throw the bombs?
Using manpower to throw the bombs would be a silly idea, since the farthest a man can throw a weight, even nowadays, is about 25 meters. A trebuchet would be the next ideal candidate, since they are pretty much designed to throw things. But even the best trebuchet known to man has a range of about 1000 meters, which is pathetic when compared to the final goal of 33 kilometers.
During the Second World War they already had guns, so Hitler could just shoot the bombs into England, right? He just needed to build a big enough gun. And guess what? He did.
Its name was Schwerer Gustav, a gigantic weapon that weighed 1300 metric tons and shot 7-ton shells as far as 47 kilometers. Gustav was a great feat of engineering and had the range that was necessary to get bombs to England, but also was just a glorified cannon that took 2000 people just to function, was very slow, and in the end just a static target to the Royal Air Force. The best solution to this problem was actually a flying bomb that was able to guide itself into the target, so in 1940, Hitler commissioned Argus to produce the V1 flying bomb. The V is for Vendetta. This archaic missile was able to travel 247 kilometers before impact and carried 850 kilograms of explosives. At peak, more than 100 V1s were fired at southeast England per day, 10,000 in total. To accomplish this, the bombs were slingshot into the air using a water catapult that accelerated the V1 to a launch speed of 200 miles per hour. This was not enough, so to increase its speed and range, the flying bomb had an onboard jet engine that thrusted the entire apparatus into the enemy lines. This specific jet engine was a pulse jet engine that used self-sustained pulsated combustion to push extremely hot gases through the exhaust and thus generate thrust. To increase the efficiency of the engine, one-way valves were used that allowed air to come in but blocked any combustion gases to escape through that end.
The problem with this solution is that when you have a valve with moving components operating inside an engine at almost 1000 degrees Celsius, well, they are not bound to last. And that's the reason why this pulse jet engine couldn't run for more than half an hour. Certainly the best way to solve this problem is to find a way to make a one-way valve with no moving parts. But apparently this is a problem that is much harder than it looks at first sight.
The only one to actually try and get a decent solution for this problem was Nikola Tesla, who needed a simple design to use in his turbines. He tried to solve the problem by creating what he called a valvular conduit, an extruded canal that intuitively seems to create more resistance in one way than in the other.
The most important question to be answered is, does the Tesla valve work? And the short answer is no. The valvular conduit is not as effective as a regular one-way valve, but it does have the advantage of not having moving parts. So even if it's able to create a little bit more resistance in one of the directions, I say it's worth investigating.
So I looked online for some answers and I found this article where fluid simulation was used to test different designs. To measure their efficiency, they used a parameter called diodicity that relates pressure drops in both directions.
A diodicity equal to 1 means that the valve is not really doing much, but any value above that indicates more resistance in one of the directions.
Using the article, I designed the single Tesla valve cell that allowed me to change some important parameters to see how it would impact the performance. Then I used SolidWorks flow simulation to run some fluid simulations across these cells, and after a lot of simulations, I arrived at a design with a diodicity of 1.3.
The next step was to add more cells and translate the 2D design into a 3D model. And if you're familiar with 3D modeling, you know there's some operations that can do just that.
We can simply extrude a 2D design by giving it some thickness to create a linear canal. This works and was actually how Nikola Tesla did his first prototypes.
He chose this method because the manufacturing processes of his time didn't allow him to go much further.
I propose that instead of using an extrusion, we can revolve the profile around an axis and create a cylindrical Tesla valve that better uses the space it occupies and has a bigger cross-section area.
With the final 3D model in my hands, I needed a process to translate a virtual design into a physical part. But not just that, because that part needed to be able to resist very high temperatures.
My first idea was to create an internal 3D printed mold using a plastic called PVA and an outside shell in PLA. PVA dissolves in water, so the plan was to fill the mold with high temperature fireplace sealant and then remove the interior mold using water.
Unfortunately, that process didn't work, because the sealant wasn't drying properly and was cracking everywhere. Also, I'm not a specialist in casting processes of any kind. The ideal solution would be to directly 3D print a geometry in a material that can withstand very high temperatures, like a ceramic or something. But I don't think that's possible.
Wait, you never heard about ceramic 3D printing? So apparently ceramic 3D printing is a thing. After looking for a while, I found a UV cured ceramic resin called porcelain. Using my Elgo Pro 2, which is a DLP 3D printer that uses UV light to cure the resin, I printed out some test parts that I post-cured using a UV light box. And as you can see, the resin can handle more than 1000 degrees Celsius.
Wait, that's not supposed to happen. The part is burning? What did I do wrong? Apparently porcelain is a mix of UV-sensitive resin and a fine ceramic powder, so to get a fully ceramic part, you need to burn out the resin.
Sponsor time!
If by any chance you guys are wondering, DAndrea, how do you know so much about fluid simulation? And where did you learn to edit your videos so well? And why is your mustache so perfect? Well, apart from my mustache, which is a birth-given follicular marvel, I had to learn the rest. When I first started my channel, I knew zero things about video production, and that's pretty obvious from my first video.
Alchemy? Or this is Inception, and we are all in a dream? Nah, it's physics.
Most of what I know I learned on the internet, part of it right here on YouTube. But when I want to learn something properly, I use Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community filled with classes about almost anything you can imagine. For this project, I really needed to know more about the production of ceramic parts. So I took this class and I soon realized that I needed to buy a kiln to post-process the 3D printed part. If you're someone creative that likes to learn and develop new and interesting projects, use my link down below. The first 1000 people to click that link will get premium access to Skillshare for free, and after that is just $10 a month. By checking out this opportunity, you're supporting the channel and helping me do more videos like this, so don't forget to give it a shot and learn something new. Back to the video.
So I needed to get a kiln to gradually heat up the part to 1300 degrees Celsius. But a standard kiln costs about $2000, so I bought a small electric kiln which is much cheaper, and also doesn't have an automatic temperature control, which means I had to manually change the temperature every hour in a cycle that takes up to 30 hours to be done. But never mind all that, because for some reason, at 350 degrees Celsius, the parts were turning black and cracking.
After some experiments, I realized that some uncured resin was getting trapped inside the canals of the valve, and during the heating process was stressing the entire part, eventually cracking it. Because I can't access the internal cavities of the valve, I can't really do much. After contacting the manufacturers of the resin, they basically told me that I was right, and also that they would try and 3D print the model and sinter the part.
In the meantime, I realized that I only need to run the engine for a short period to see if the valve is working, so I 3D printed a Tesla valve to see how long it would survive in a running engine. Talking about the engine, I still didn't have one, so using the method I used in a previous video, I 3D printed a mold in PLA and used it to laminate the engine with carbon fiber and fireplace sealant. On my last video, you guys gave me some suggestions on how to improve the performance of the engine. One of them was to use only one intake, so I used the plans for a focused wave engine that only has one air inlet. The other suggestion was to bend the tubes in a wider angle, because the way I did it in the other engine was bottlenecking the fuel line. Before inserting the Tesla valve, I did a quick test on the engine without the valve to see how much thrust the engine would produce. And I got about 450 grams of thrust, which is more or less a pound. After that, I inserted the ceramic valve on the engine using high temperature sealant, and I gave it another go. At first I tried to go straight into the thrust measuring setup. I tried again and again and was getting nothing. Thinking the difficulty came from the awkward setup, I switched to the device where I feel more comfortable starting the engines, and normally I'm able to get them going pretty fast. Soon enough I got the engine roaring, but it wouldn't start, and it didn't take much time for me to realize what was going on.
I got so focused on getting a high diodicity that I completely forgot about the forward pressure drop.
The diodicity is the reversed pressure drop over the forward pressure drop, which means you can have an amazing value of diodicity and still have a lot of resistance in the forward direction.
Unfortunately, this was the case. The pressure drop in the way in was about 5 bars, and my compressor puts out about 8 bars of pressure, which means that the air that got into the engine was at 3 bars of pressure.
Most of the time I need to go full throttle on the compressed air to start the engine. I wasn't getting anywhere with 3 bars. My first thought was, just increase the valve canals, in that way there's a smaller pressure drop.
The problem with that solution is that as soon as I enlarge the canals, the diodicity drops considerably. And as I said before, a Tesla valve with a diodicity close to 1 isn't really doing much. What we have here is a design paradox, and instead of trying to solve it on my own, I'm calling out for your help. Use the comment section below to suggest new designs, new ideas, and new modifications. In the end, I didn't get what I wanted, but this is how the scientific process works. 1000 failures to get to 1 success. Anyways, this is everything for today. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, tomatoes are disgusting. A while ago, when I used to do fake sponsor bits just for giggles, I actually made a parody of Skillshare called Skillswear, where the people teaching the classes would insult you while explaining stuff. Skillshare is much better. The people teaching the classes are very nice and professionals, so don't forget to check out the link in the description below. See ya!
Since I was a child.